Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and welcome to our first ever virtual reunion event. This is our kickoff event tonight, leading forward our speaker series. My name is Kate Treitman Brown. I graduated from Nobles in '99, and I work in the Office of Graduate Affairs. We hope that you enjoy the events this week, and everything can be found at nobles.edu/reunion 2021. We appreciate you spending the next 45 minutes or so with us, and we have a fantastic program tonight, one that I've been looking forward to for a while. Thanks to the Graduate Council and the tech team at Nobles for helping us to engage with you this week. We will hear from our speakers and then have an opportunity for question and answer, but you can use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen at any time during the presentation. So first I'll introduce our speakers and then turn it over to them. Tonight's talk will be a conversation between our 2021 Young Graduate Award winner, Mariel Novas, and Nobles' own head of school, Dr. Cathy Hall. Mariel graduated from Nobles in 2006, where she was a senior prefect, the president of MSA, and a middle school mentor. After Nobles, she went on to Yale, where she received a BA in history and ethnicity, race, and migration. She then went to Boston University for a master's in curriculum and teaching. In 2020, Mariel earned a doctorate in education leadership from Harvard Graduate School of Education. While Mariel graduated from Nobles 15 years ago, she has remained extremely active as a graduate, serving on the Board of Trustees from 2014 to 2017. An immigrant from the Dominican Republic who was both a student and later a teacher in the Boston Public Schools, Mariel is an education advocate who promotes radical healing and educational justice through people power and community organizing. As Director of Partnerships and Engagement for Massachusetts at the Education Trust, she convened Massachusetts Education Equity Partnership, a statewide coalition of civil rights, social justice, and education advocates who advance educational and racial equity in historically underserved communities across the Commonwealth. Prior to joining EdTrust, she launched the homegrown program at Teach for America, Massachusetts. She was a community organizer and co-founder of the Boston Education Action Network and a middle school math teacher in Dorchester for newcomers from Latin America. In 2018, Mariel was selected as a recipient of El Mundo Boston's Latino 30 Under 30 Award. She enjoys singing loudly from the car, and she believes in nature therapy. Tonight, she joins us from the West Coast, where hopefully the sun is shining bright. Mariel will be joined by our own head of school, Cathy Hall. A lifelong educator, Cathy has been leading Nobles for almost 4 years. She came to us from Episcopal Academy in Newtown, Pennsylvania. Over the course of her career in education, Cathy has been an upper school English teacher, a middle school math teacher, and a varsity soccer coach. Cathy lives on campus with her 3 children, current 5-y Matthew, incoming 6-y Thomas, and 10-year-old Evelyn. Cathy and Mariel, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, thank you, Kate, and welcome everybody. It's so good to see all of you. And I trust you, Mariel. I feel a lot older, but I can appreciate whatever my whatever my bios read. I'm always like, oh, how much older will I feel this time? I am just so excited to be a part of this tonight and to kick off. But I'm excited for the week ahead and all the wonderful things to come. But this is a very special night with a very special person. And when I think about our mission and our mission-driven work of leading for the public good, I just can't think of anybody who epitomizes that right now, which is very much why she's our Young Grad Award winner. But goodness, I just can't wait to see what her life does to impact the lives of others. I was privileged to first meet Mariel during the search process for this position, and I immediately knew she was someone who I just wanted to spend a lot of time with. So I felt deeply cheated when I learned that she'd be rolling off the board to pursue her doctorate. However, I decided to make it my mission to keep her very close to Nobles and have declared myself the president of the Mariel Novas fan club. So I am pretty excited to be able to interview someone who I really do know is going to change the world for my children and my grandchildren and for so many others.
Wow, Cathy.
Oh, of course, of course. So let's, it feels like before we dive into all of these questions, and I do want to emphasize what Kate said, if you do have questions, to please put them in the Q&A. We probably got about 15 or 20 minutes where I'll be asking questions, but would love to then have questions in the queue that we can pull from. But so this has been a really rough journey for all of us, a rough journey for our nation, our local community. This last year has been very hurtful and hard. How are you doing?
It's like my favorite question these days because it changes by the day, sometimes by the hour. So I'll respond in that way. I think right now I'm in San Diego for a short season, thanks to a friend who's very graciously hosting me. So if you hear a rooster, that's what's going on. And so I think I'm finally like feeling full of the vitamin D that I've been deprived of for months. But I think right now feeling steady, feeling like I'm coming alive again, to be really honest. I was sharing with, I saw our friend Becky Barbaro from class of '06 just a couple days ago and met her new little baby. And we were just sitting in her sort of backyard and under the sun and realizing that we both, after our first vaccine shot, just like lost it in the observation area, as that we were coming to terms with just how much we've been holding, just how traumatic this time has been. And, you know, for me, especially, I've been just day to day kind of in survival mode. And so getting vaccinated, making this trip out west, which is a trip, you know, completely for in service of personal healing. I'm feeling stronger than I have felt in a long time.
That's awesome. That's awesome. If you hear noises behind me, it's probably one of my kids or the dog. So I apologize for that too. But that's what evening events do for us these
days.
It's
the Chick-fil-A. Right.
So a few weeks ago, we were so privileged to have you join our head of school toast and to share your powerful remarks. And you referenced what you called the polluted air that we're living within. And I found that to be such a powerful metaphor. Can you speak a little bit more to what you mean by that and what that means for you in terms of the time and space that we're in right now?
Yeah, and thank you for referencing that, because it's how I have grown in my work throughout the last decade. I've done a lot to facilitate groups of especially educators around the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, anti-racism, and really just the personal development that comes with that work. And so I've dug deep into the work of Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum. For those of you who have read Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, she's the author of that book and others. And she talks about systemic racism as being smog in the air. And there's this quote that I often reference where I'm going to butcher it, but she says, you know, racism is like smog in the air. Sometimes it is so visible, it is thick. And, you know, and other times, you know, you don't even notice it, but every day we are breathing it in. And so for me, that just became such a clear way of understanding the way racism and white supremacy operates in our world in terms of smog, right? It's pollution. It's not about, you know, and I have found in spaces I've held in the past that people often want to find like, who's the racist in the room, right? Is it you? You know, is it like a specific person? And I think that gets us away from the important conversation, which is it's not about the individuals and the acts of racism that are at the individual level. It's about understanding the way it operates in our world, in our system as pollution. And the fact that no matter, you know, who you are, whether you're a white person, person of color, we are all breathing in the polluted air of systemic racism and white supremacist ideology. And so if we see it as pollution, then we recognize that all of us have work to do to expel that polluted air from within us, to understand the way it's operating and really work to undo it. And so for me, I think it leads to a more interesting conversation, a more productive conversation about how to challenge these sort of endemic realities in our world when we stop trying to point the finger at like, who is the person it's coming from, and instead really try to address the environment that we're all moving in.
Wow, thank you for that. I so wholeheartedly agree of how eager everybody is to be able to name who's responsible or who's owning that and to look outside of themselves. And I agree, that's such a powerful way to reframe it.
And the fact that it's operating inside each of us, right? Like I walk in a Black body, I too breathe in white supremacist ideology. I too develop mindsets and preferences and dispositions that ascribe to this white dominant culture. And so for, you know, it's sort of a call to action for each and every person, no matter where you're coming into the conversation.
Oh, that's awesome. So I will not, I think maybe ever forget in our relationship over the years, what happened a few months ago when you and I had set up time to talk, and I get on a Zoom with you and said, actually, I think it was the same question. How are you doing? And you said, well, I quit my job about 10 minutes ago. And it was a very powerful moment, and one I was privileged to be a part of. But I would love to, I always think when I read resumes or I hear bios, I always want to know the story. And I'd love to start with what drew you to the work you're doing now? What got you to where you were working with Education Trust and thinking about this mission-driven work that is so deeply hard, so deeply impactful, so deeply empowering and inspiring? What's the why that kind of lifts off from what Kate read in your bio?
It's so interesting. I feel like if you had asked me that question a year ago, 2 years ago, I probably would have answered it a slightly different way. I'm just reflecting in real time about like, what is my why right now?
I should also say, just so you guys know, I'm really a mean interviewer. She's not seeing these questions ahead of time, which is probably not very fair. It's my confidence in your ability to navigate and yes, yes. So anyway, apologies if she needs a minute to think.
I actually prefer it that way. You'll get my like right off the heart and right off the head responses. Right. But honestly, it all goes back to my family. I am an immigrant from the Dominican Republic. We moved to Boston when I was 5 years old. And so much of my story has flowed from being a member of that family structure, of understanding what radical unconditional love looks like and what showing up for each other looks like, no matter where you are. I was the first in my family to go to college. I went to Yale, as Kate mentioned. And I've had the privilege of walking into so many rooms where I'm an only or the first. And it's been lonely many times. And yet I've always known that even though I've never had a financial safety net, I think the emotional safety net, the love that I always fall back on, has always informed the way that I move in my life. And so when I graduated from college and I became a teacher, it was, just clear to me, a few things. One, that I would teach with love, and I would engage with love. And two, based on my experiences at Nobles, I was a student at Nobles for 6 years. And those of you who were at my graduation or fellow classmates in the class of 06 will remember, like, I held up that receiving line.
You're the person. Like, every class has their person. You were the person that held up the receiving line.
It was me. I was crying hysterically. I didn't know what to do with myself. I just loved, my teachers so much. And so a lot of how I understood my impact, or the potential for my impact in my work, was through this combination of just like profound love, education, and justice. Understanding that for me, every single door would not have been open in the absence of those things, right? I was a Stepping Stone Scholar in the class of 2000, which, for those who don't know, it's an organization that, for the last 30 years or so has supported high achieving kids in the Boston public schools in attaining access to exam schools and independent schools outside of Boston. And so that was my entry point into Nobles in the 7th grade. It was thanks to Stepping Stone, thanks to my 4th grade teacher, who literally drove my parents to the interview, paid for the application fee, translated for us, and really just believed in me at a time when, my dad worked 3 jobs. My mom was taking care of the 5 kids that were here. And I had no idea what I was doing. I was just loving school and being a nerd. And so much of my experiences growing up really had to do with those pillars, that when it came time to think about, where can I really have the greatest impact and effect, it had to be in education. I remember I was on a path in college to pursue my PhD, and I was like all about like nerding out and like looking into like ethnic studies and like really thinking and talking through what it means to be a nation, issues of diaspora. And so I was like all about that. But in my belly, I just knew I had to come back home. I wanted to work with kids. I wanted to understand what it was like to really understand at a systemic level the issues and challenges that my community was constantly faced with, and to do something about it. And so it was from there, first as a classroom teacher, then working with teachers and educators as a coach, and then, you know, building out what we call the homegrown program within Teach for America to really focus on, you know, we need teachers of color in the classroom who share the life experiences of our students. And so how do we really build that out? And from there, you know, this is around 2016 now, watching 45 run for president, realizing that, you know, I had so many hangups, so much like imposter syndrome, so much insecurity about what I could or could not do. And I, you know, came across the doctoral program at Harvard, and was terrified to apply, but kind of felt like I didn't have an option. You know, the worst they can say is no, and then we'll be right back where we were. And thankfully, you know, things played out well, but really pursued that with the hope and the goal that I would be able to develop and grow as a person, as a leader, to be able to bring the lessons, not just from my life, but from the classroom and from my work with educators, into really thinking about building a movement. And that's really the work that I did with the Education Trust, was how do we, you know, really focus on the things that unite us and not the things that separate us, to create change and drive educational and racial equity in our state.
That's awesome. You know, you just got me thinking when you were talking. I'm always so struck when I hear people's life journey. There's always a person or people who make the difference, right? You talk about your fourth grade teacher. Yeah. And it's, I think about that, like how do we provide more people who intervene on the lives and advocates for our kids? And that's just awesome. You know,
there are many.
There are many. There are many.
For those who follow Game of Thrones or who watch Game of Thrones, you know, Arya has her kill list. Right? I don't have a kill list, but I have a list. It's my gratitude list, right? Of just like the people, the humans who have held the door open for me, and there are many.
Well, and those, I think that's right. And I think that many, you know, those of us who go into education know we have the power to make a difference in the lives of those who, and we've all had our own people. We all have that gratitude list that we need to hold dear. You know, what was so inspiring for me in our conversation was you left your last job without a job. I said, so what's next? You're like, I have absolutely no idea. I'd love to hear, you know, that was my first question. We talked again a few weeks ago. What are you doing? What have you been doing? I'd love for you to share. What have you been doing? What have the last few months been for you? I'll say this before you answer, the intentionality that you have with your life, the unbelievably deep reflections. You talked about how you felt obligated to apply to the, you know, the Harvard doctoral program. You do have a sense of purpose and journey. And so I just love for you to share what's been that purpose and journey over the last few months.
Okay. My heart's beating really fast, and I'm gonna hope and pray I don't cry during this, but it's only because I just, okay. But it's been an incredibly tough 2 years. I think already I was in a place of profound personal grief and growing after the death of my brother almost about 2 years ago, who passed suddenly due to an accidental drug overdose. And so had been completing my final year at Harvard, really holding this profound hurt and navigating what that meant for me, for my family, and it really started to challenge for me my why, which is why earlier I said, like, how will I answer this question? You know, what is it that I'm driving at, and am I doing these things because I want to do them, or because I've been doing them for so long, and there have been so many expectations placed on me that I've just been sort of operating on autopilot. And so that's sort of what came with me into the last year of pandemic. And, you know, in my remarks a few weeks ago with the head of school dinner, I mentioned, you know, that I'm not okay, that Black folks, people of color, are not okay. I have had to watch over the last year as several members of my family became sick with COVID. My sister almost died. And, you know, evictions of family members from their homes, or threatened evictions, loss of jobs. And more than that, you know, at the sort of community level, there was a point in time last year when I would log on to Facebook and I would just see a litany of rest in peace, like RIP, RIP, just from the high prevalence of COVID deaths in communities of color, in working class communities. And so, you know, as somebody who is very much an empath and I feel the pain of others, and I have been blessed with so many communities that I'm a part of. It wrecked my heart. I was completely and utterly heartbroken by the level of loss, by the level of neglect. And at the same time, I was still, in my function as an advocate, working with this beautiful growing coalition to try to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 with regard to the fact that our students were sent home and were, engaging in remote learning. And so much inequity that already existed in our school system, particularly our public school system, just became so much deeper and pronounced. We had students in communities like mine who were driving to, their like local Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks or Wendy's or whatever, just to grab Wi-Fi from the parking lot, because that's the only way that they could log on. We had students like the ones that I taught who recently arrived immigrants, didn't speak English, trying to navigate a completely new language that is, and on and on and on and on. And so I share all these things because they were all living inside me, right? And then at the same time, we're watching the continuation of white supremacist violence and its attack, not just on the bodies of people of color and Black people, but on the psyches. And I think as I, had been doing a lot of work around understanding and challenging and addressing trauma in our communities, I really understood the way trauma was operating in me. I became, and I'll just be really honest, I became so disconnected from my body. I would just work all day and sort of felt, as you said, Cathy, like this obligation that like I had to do something or people would die. Like that's literally how it was playing out in my head, in my soul. If I don't look out for my family, somebody will die. If I don't, fight just a little bit harder for this policy change, our kids will die, won't have access to education, right? And so I was in therapy throughout that time, and I hope a lot of us are in therapy, frankly. There's no way in which this toxicity hasn't reached each of us. And so it just got to the point as we turned into a new year where I started kind of seeing myself and seeing the life I was conducting, and I didn't want it for several reasons. I don't want to be the workaholic who is up till 8, 9 p.m. and I still haven't had breakfast, right? I don't want to be the person lying in bed, just like catastrophic thinking, like all the things that could go wrong are going wrong, unable to sleep for days on end. I don't want to give myself over to depression and anxiety, and understanding at the same time that living in this Black body has meant that I've absorbed so much of that heaviness, that oppression. I'm reading a book right now called My Grandmother's Hands by, I have it right here, Resmaa Menakem. And he talks about just the ways in which racism is literally inscribed in our bodies for both white folks and people of color. And so when we had our conversation a few months ago, and I happened to have just resigned from my job, it was the first time in my life, if I can be honest, that I feel like I really stood up for myself and really loved myself more than my love for my family, my community, my mission. I need to be present in my body in order to be able to do anything for another, right? It's the like, put your own, whatever the expression is, thing first. Y'all know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so I realized that I had to fight for myself, that I had to fight for my life. And that, when white supremacy wins, when folks in Black bodies like mine die. And it became very clear to me that there are many people whose legacy I hope to follow in Black women activists of years and generations past who die young, who aren't able to form or have challenges in their families, who have all sorts of health issues. And so I'm recommitting with profound conviction and hope to me, and to really ensuring that the internal strength and power that I hold is lit first, because this has been absolutely wild. And I want us all, and I'm sharing transparently because I want us all to move to a place where we can talk about these things, matters of mind, body, and spirit, transparently, because we are holding so much. And so yeah, I don't know what I'm doing next. I'm here in San Diego, hanging out by the beach and under the sun, and allowing myself to be self, without so many external expectations, for the first time, so that I can really dig deep and figure out, in this world that we are currently in, what does it mean to fight for justice? What does it mean to show up in full empowerment?
That is awesome. And by the way, I do love the rooster in the background as a nice addition to the to our webinar. When we spoke a few weeks ago, actually, we went off on our own kind of tangents. We got away from preparing for this, but I actually decided to ask you the same questions. You mentioned one of the books. My first question was, what are you reading? Because I'm always interested when I meet people who are brilliant like you and who are so self-reflective and seem to be so just pushing your own growth and thinking. And you mentioned one of the books. What else are you reading right now? What else is pushing your thinking and your own, as you said, back into your own body, and you're kind of refilling that well? What are you reading that's informing all of that?
So reading a lot. It's been exciting to nerd out again, and kind of pick up what I want to pick up. So aside from My Grandmother's Hands, which I'm like 100 pages in, I've been reading Love and Rage by Lama Rod Owens, and another book called Anatomy of the Spirit. So the moment, sort of the breaking point in this story I just shared, really came in January, when I was like driving on the Tobin Bridge to drop off my sister in Chelsea, and we were just talking normally, and I just escalated. Like I just started like I was just like, nah! and next thing I knew, I was just screaming. And when I pulled, to the side of the road, because I couldn't see, because my eyes were just like full of tears, I just like started sobbing. And I realized that what I was holding was this like ancestral rage, like this anger that I didn't know where to put it. And it didn't feel just mine. It felt like I felt the rage of so many families, so many people, so many generations, so much frustration. Like there have been so many who have laid down their lives, who have fought for this. And there I saw myself, in this lineage, still confronting these massive forces and capital I institutions of oppression. And I just sort of like let it all go, and simultaneously realized that like I am deeply uncomfortable showing up in anger, in full anger. I've learned throughout my life to package my anger to be palatable for others, especially attending predominantly white institutions, right? How do I make myself heard and understood without being cast as an angry Black woman? I've kept my anger in a ball, and yet it all kind of just exploded in the last few months. And so Love and Rage, reading that, to understand how they kind of exist as a continuum, or as a kind of like the sides of the same coin, and understand how to like metabolize, that's the word I wanted to say, and alchemize anger into something that I don't need to get rid of. But I need to learn to harness, and I need to learn to befriend, honestly, to speak in sort of meditation language, and really understand it for the pain that it represents. And so I'm pairing that with this other book, Anatomy of the Spirit, which I think the subheadline is like the 7 stages of power and healing. And this author brings together like different traditions, kind of like Hinduism, Buddhism, and the chakra system, with like the 7 sacraments of Christianity, and the tree of life concept from Judaism, and really thinks through how do we understand our bodies as having centers of healing and power, and how do we really understand how what blockages exist that connect to our various like organs and body systems that can give us a ton of information about where we're experiencing pain and how we can actually find healing for those parts of us. And so learning a whole lot about like, oh, is that why I get so many headaches? Right? And just other ways of understanding myself and what I'm going through in in a way that gives me more to hold on to than just like I'm angry, or I'm sad, or my stomach hurts, or like why do I have these back pains all the time? I think I'm just growing my understanding of all the different ways in which healing can come.
You know, what's just so fascinating, there's so many things fascinating and inspiring about you, but what I've come to learn, I would have said about you several years ago, she's one of the more deeply reflective people I've met. But what I've come to understand about you is that you have a way of situating what you see about yourself. You're talking about yourself both within, and you're actually able to talk about yourself from without. And you also do two things that is a model in ways that I just can't describe how awesome it is. You talked about the obligation that you felt and all of that incredible weight that, as you described it, I can almost feel the weight that you were feeling, but then are also able to go outside of yourself and talk about the need for you to take care of yourself. And you're able to do that. That is an incredibly powerful thing that you did, to recognize the need for you to put your energy on you. But you're also able to see yourself in that perspective. And it's pretty remarkable. I don't know if you recognize how extraordinary it is. I'd love to pivot a little bit to Nobles. And for those of you, we're going to move to questions in the chat after I talk about some Nobles questions. So please, we'll get to as many, or in the Q&A, sorry, throw as many questions as you can. So, of course, you've been involved here for over a few decades in many different ways, at different moments of time. You've seen this institution through so many different prisms, from your first year coming through the Stepping Stone Scholars Program, to your time on our board, to your time as an engaged graduate that I won't allow to get out of our orbit. I'd love to, so I would love to have your lens of what you're willing to share about, what in your view have you seen change at Nobles? What have you seen not change at Nobles? What for you has been kind of on that arc and that radar? And you talked about your time in historically white institutions, since you have a very broad perspective beyond just Nobles, but would love to get your sense of where we are in that journey. And you spoke so eloquently about it in your remarks a few weeks ago, but would love to have you share your thoughts.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been with Nobles since the year 2000. Which is, I just saw, I think Ali Trainer sent out the Nobles 06 video yearbook, which I actually hadn't seen, that Mariel Rich and Lauren Finkelstein created in our senior year. And I was just like, I was looking at like our clothes and the hairstyles.
You guys were so cool. You're the coolest class. The dress is cool. You got it.
If you say so, Cathy.
I actually haven't seen the pictures, but you're always cool. You're timeless.
Wearing, and also just like the really thin eyebrow. I'm really glad to be here. But it was also really awesome to just have like step back into that moment and our class and like the humor and all of that. And so I think, one of the things I've really seen change throughout that time and being on the board and getting that up close and personal perspective as well, is really, I think, the school's understanding of diversity has very much exploded. I think when I came as a student and when I was with MSA, with the Multicultural Student Association and as president, one of like my this is like the mountain I will die on, was to kind of break that black-white binary, which I don't fit into, right? Like, yes, I'm Black, but I'm Dominican and I'm an immigrant and I have a life experience that is very distinct and different from the African-American experience. And so being a student at Nobles for 6 years, and especially the first 3, really not having a ton of other Spanish-speaking classmates was incredibly hard, and not having Spanish-speaking faculty that I could connect to on that level. And it wasn't until going to the upper school when I met Marcela Maldonado, who just like continues to be to this day one of the people in my life who has just like informed all of it. That was like, it was like having mommy at school, right? And then, Lourdes Toribio arrived in our class from Lawrence. She's also Dominican in our sophomore year. And I started to kind of feel like, okay, I feel like there are there are these parts of me that have kind of had to stay separate that I can start bringing to the table, bringing to my classes in a more concerted way. And so now I see, looking back, so like that strong desire that I had just to be seen for who I was and for all of me, right? In the video yearbook, I actually talked about like my favorite memory was from my quinceañera, our freshman year, when, you know, I lived in Roxbury at the time in a tiny apartment, and yet like I think like 30 of our classmates showed up for my quinceañera with like my very Dominican family, and you know, just like bachata, merengue playing, and like Dominican food, and there were my classmates, right? And it was this moment when I realized like they see me for me fully and like still love me and accept me. But that was really tough at the time, right? To really kind of like puncture through and like make sure folks understood me for who I was. And so through MSA, really worked to kind of highlight those that level of diversity. And with my senior project as well, I did a compilation of stories of like teachers, alumni, students at Nobles, to kind of for the same purpose, to really make sure that we are allowing for all these different stories to always be present and elevated. Now at Nobles, I see just like a wide range of diverse voices and experiences that are present. And I especially see that within the Asian American community, where we just like, it has grown tremendously over the last decade or two. And that's beautiful. It's important for us to see that it's not just one of anything. And the fact that, you know, my being Dominican is a distinct experience from somebody who's Puerto Rican, who, even though, you know, the islands neighbor each other, and so on and so on. And so I think that's really a critical shift. That said, I think to answer your other question about what hasn't changed is I really think about, you know, when we think about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the E and the I, like we really have to hold with like dedicated attention, right? Like, and for those who don't move in this language all the time, when we talk about equity, it really speaks to making sure that everybody has what they need in order to succeed. And when we speak about inclusion, it's really a question of belonging. Do people see themselves as belonging to that space? And so even as we have made great strides in the realm of diversity, I still find that there is much work to be done at Nobles with regard to equity and inclusion. And that really comes with understanding the life stories, the needs, the unique needs of our students based on where they're coming from. And just to share an example of that, I was somebody who was commuting in from Boston every morning and every evening. And when I think about my Nobles experience, like there's no way that I don't always think about the Forest Hills bus and like my commute, leaving home at like 5:30 in the morning and taking like 2 buses, a train, the carpool, all the way to Dedham, and then doing the same in reverse all the way back, coming home, leaving home when it's dark, coming home when it's dark. And I'll never forget, there was this one time that BPS closed for a snow day, Noble stayed open. And I had my little like student T-Pass, and I tried to get on the bus, and the bus driver yelled at me, and he said like, what are you're trying, like, essentially like accusing me of trying to like get a free ride at 7, like, or whatever time it was.
I'm just going to school. Like, yeah.
Why would I want to do that? Like, I want to sleep. And he didn't let me on the bus. And I cried my eyes out.
What did you do?
I called Nobles.
Who did you call? So who's the phone call to?
Carol Derdarian picked up the phone, and she could barely understand me. I was just crying hysterically. And she was like, she's like, we'll send a taxi to come get you. But you know, like little things like that, that's just like small moments of large oversight that have a huge impact on those of us who have different experiences, right? When it came to sports, the sports equipment, like having access to the equipment, having access to the clinics that take place before school starts, where like the soccer practices and all that. And of course, like Nobles is an incredibly generous place, so there was always somebody who was able to somehow help me out. But it shouldn't kind of come down to those individual acts of giving it should be something that is packaged into the experience and sort of thought about in advance.
Yeah.
And then lastly, when we think about inclusion and that sense of belonging, right? I walked through the halls of nobles, at whatever age I was there, and I didn't see myself on the walls. And that stuff matters,
That stuff
right?
matters.
I didn't see myself represented I had to wait until my senior year to take a class with Mr. Buzzy on Latin American history to see myself in literature, really. Aside from like The House on Mango Street, which we read in 9th grade, right? And so it's in the curriculum. It's in literally how we structure our schools. It's in who we hire and put in front of kids.
Yeah.
Like all that stuff really matters. And I think there's still a lot of growth for nobles in those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I 100% agree with you, of course. And these are all areas that we're diving in on, and it's work that is hard and enduring, right? This isn't the checkbox of, okay, I'll get back to you in a month. It's in many cases systems that have to shift.
Absolutely.
I'd love to jump to, there's some great questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to start with one from Becky Grant, who says, one, if you could talk to yourself as a 60, what would you say?
I'm gonna cry.
Oh,
Oh my goodness. It is, I think, honestly, I was so concerned with, I mean, every middle schooler is, but I think especially coming from Boston and being, all those things, like that it is okay to be me. I recently reread like all my diaries because I journaled from like when I was 8 years old through college. And I was rereading all of these texts in my own words from my time at Nobles. And I was just so uncomfortable in my skin. I grew to a point where like I hated myself. And that was really hard to read how much I hated my hair, how much I hated my skin color, how much I resented feeling so invisible at times. And like working so hard to be somebody who I wasn't, when like the whole time I'm like reading myself and I'm like, you're so cool, right? Like I wish I had like seen myself in that light back then and just like let that light shine. Yes. Which over time I found ways to do that at Nobles, especially in the upper school. But I think, 7th and 8th grade, that 60 and 50 year, I was just so out of my element and everything was foreign. And so I decided that like I just had to adapt to whatever was around me, as opposed to like bringing all of me with me. And so, I see that though as part of my life journey and experience, and like thank that time for where I am now.
Yeah, I'm curious, like if you can channel back, would something have made a difference for you back then? Did you just need to go through that journey, given all you described, or is there something the institution could have done, a teacher could have done? Was there something that could have made that different for you?
Yeah, I think in part it's kind of like, that's a tough question. I'm in this period of my life where I'm just like, surrender, like things are, and so there's a part of me that's kind of like, no, that experience was what it needed to be. But if I think about, 60s now, like, of course I wouldn't want like more kids to go through that experience. I do think it really matters who is in the faculty. It absolutely makes a difference to be able to make sense of your experiences with somebody who has been there before, with somebody who has like kind of walked those paths, because I just felt so alone. And I was so confused. And then I would go home and there's nobody there that really would understand what I was going through. Or I could like make sense what was going on. So I really just turned inward, right? Like didn't really have an escape valve, so to speak, at school or at home. Although I say that and like shout out to Mr. Hollister, because like Mr. Hollister took me under his wing and was like a guardian angel for me in those 2 years. But yeah, I definitely think that it matters who the adults in the room are.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. So Eliza Good has asked, what do you want to say to white Nobles grads who aren't on this call when you think about social justice, race, etc.? Is there something that you're
Yeah.
hoping you could message to that group, or you're most hoping I'd even expand it to say, you know, what's the work you most hope they are doing to contribute to what
Yeah.
you're talking about?
I love that question. I think one of the most beautiful aspects of nobles and sort of a typical nobles person is the giving nature of folks who go through who walk those halls. I feel like so much of my leadership for the public good, so much of like my understanding of community service really stems from the education I received at Nobles. And so I really feel that there is like that needs to be honored and should continue. And I think selfishly, because I'm also going through this, like my message would be to go inward, right? I think the work isn't in all that you can do, but it's in who you. This is not going to be correct English, but it's like it's in the being, it's in the who you be, right? It's in the thoughts you have, the conversations you hold, the way you interrupt cycles of racism when you see it, how you engage with your family and with your friends. Things like where you choose to live and invest your resources, right? There are so many conversations that we've been conditioned to be afraid of and have made to be taboo. But I really think that even though we're seeing a revolution in our country, I very much believe the revolution is internal. And each of us, especially white folks, have to really come inside and really sit with, where does white supremacy live in me? And that has to be, and I think preferably being able to have that conversation, and it's not just a conversation, y'all, like this is life, right? Being able to have folks that you trust in your environment who are also white, to be able to get the pollution out, right? And one of the things, and I'm just gonna show the book because it's right here, but one of the things that like the book really goes into, when he talks about the trauma that it has been inscribed in white bodies, right? He really goes into, okay, so what do we think has happened to the humanity or psyches of white people who have borne witness to the exacting of oppression? Like what has been the toll, what has been passed down from generation to generation? We often have this conversation about racism and all of this through the lens of like the impact on folks of color, which we absolutely must center. But we have that conversation to the exclusion of unpacking what the impact has been on white bodies, on white psyches, the ways in which that shows up every single day. And so I think fearlessly going into that for my white peers is exactly the work that has to happen so that it can show up systemically, right? You can't sort of do externally and hope that things will change, because you're still showing up. There's a quote that's like, wherever you go, there you are, right? You're still showing up as you. And so if you're not interrogating the ways in which your thought processes come out, or the ways in which why you make certain choices, if you're not really looking into that, you will never understand why things are the way they are. Yeah. Because the analysis has to start with you first.
Yeah. I've always heard that phrase, you become more like yourself as you get older.
Yeah.
Right. Which is usually not meant to be a compliment, I think. You're like, those habits. I saw there was a comment.
And actually, Cathy, on that point, I think it's really important to name the following. And again, I feel like this is a lot of what I'm going through, which is we all have to be willing to shed and not be so attached to the identity that we have been conditioned to be, right? Like I got to a place where I had to ask myself, like, what is Mariel Novas even, right? Like, who is that? And be willing to be different than the person people have grown to see me as. And I think a lot of what we're talking about, and I really hate when people just like ascribe things like identity politics as if it's something that's just like, wow. It's like, no, like your identity is your you-ness, right? And so much of what becomes challenging about anti-racist work for people is that it's challenging them at their core. It's challenging them at the who they are level, at the like, wait, but like I'm Cathy, and like I'm a leader, and so like I'm not supposed to, right? And it's like, and if I'm Cathy and a leader, I'm just using you because you're in front of me, right? But like if I'm these things, then I can't also be this,
Right.
and it becomes a cognitive dissonance. And so you stop the work because it threatens your sense of I. And so as we are doing this sort of like internal unpacking, I think it's so important to give ourselves the grace to be different and to grow and not just be like more of yourself or the self that you've been recycling.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I want to address, I see a few questions that are saying, why can't we see all the questions? So for any of the like large school webinars, this is always how it's preset, where and we obviously try to type answers to questions, or I'm trying to get to all of them I can. So there's actually, I can't change that, or I would, but I'll try to get to all the questions I see in here, although I think we're going to run out of time, but I'll do my best. I love this one because it picks up on what I think you were just saying, and it's from, and I'm going to end, by the way, there's so many shout outs to you, and I wish you could see them all. So I'm going to read some shout outs before we finish, but Corey Rosenfield, right. Corey, so you got this great, I love this question though, because we just talk so much at Nobles, our mission, as you know, around leadership for the public good. And I'm like, wow, I honestly think there's this huge, giganto question of what does that mean for us? What does that mean for us in general? What does that mean for us now? When we think about graduating students who lead for the public good at a time when, goodness, this world needs some good and some change. And so the question is, you've been both a teacher of young minds and a leader of our broader community. How are the leaders of tomorrow, like you, going to change the world for the better? And what do we need to protect against? And I guess I read that and I was thinking about it through the lens of the mission-driven work we're doing every day at Nobles when we think about the change we need to make at our institution, but also thinking well beyond our institution and the ways in which what we're able to do can be transformative. So I'd love to get your thoughts about that.
Yeah. Oh, Corey, I'm giving you a hug. Okay, leadership for the public good. As I think about like this era, this like world that we're being birthed into, that in so many ways has been so heartbreaking and crushing, but at the very same time has like absolutely like floored me with its beauty. And the moments of like profound beauty for me have come when these very distinct, diverse communities have come together. And even as I was in deep mourning, and frankly, just like horror after the murder of George Floyd, where I saw, it's like, are we at the point where a Black man can like die slowly while being taped under the boot of a cop, and we are just going on about our days? Like it, that was just, that numbed so many parts of me and also just like activated them at the same time. And it activated a lot of people, right? The protests that ensued in response to his murder were the largest in the history of our country, right? And I think about that, and I think that because the horror and the pain are so strong, I'll speak for myself. I haven't done as good of a job holding that which has also been equally just like on the other side of the spectrum, amazing about this period of time. I also think about the insurrection on January 6th on the Capitol, which like, we don't have enough time for me to talk about like how that really just like messed me up. But that overshadowed the fact that like Black folks in Georgia turned out in such astronomical numbers that both seats turned blue, right? And I'm having to kind of hold that these things are happening at the same time. And given my work as an advocate, as an educator, really thinking about, so what does this mean, right? It means that the antidote, right? And this is what I really focus my doctoral work on. The antidote to, the sort of harm of white supremacy and systemic racism is right there. It's community, it's connectedness, it's our ability to come together across many lines of difference and advocate for change. And this has been the story of this country at its best. And I think really coming to a place now where we understand that like that's where it lies again, at a time when we're also more segmented than we've ever been. And like, unfortunately, and I want to nerd out and talk about like the ways in which social movements have shifted over time, but we don't have time for that probably. But a lot of what like the labor movement throughout history really represented was this like these cross-racial coalitions that formed to really advocate for workers' rights.
Mhm.
And so what does that look like today? And so to answer Corey's question, right, about like, what is leadership for the public good as we move forward? I really think it has to be centered and anchored in that sort of first tapping into our internal humanity, because I really believe that it's sort of been beat out of us, senseless. If we continue seeing one more video of a Black man being killed, or another set of images of migrants crossing the border hoping to just have a better life through the lens of seeing them as parts of caravans and like really disgusting other names that are used, we have to understand that that's hitting us at a psychic level. Right. And so we have to reclaim our humanity. We have to reclaim our sensing, right? To really be able to sit in the pain of others and connect to that ourselves. But we won't be able to connect to that unless we do that work of going inward, right? And so when I think about moving forward, it's a two thing, right? The first is really holding yourself in a way that is unlike anything we've ever done, because it's just not how our world operates. And then also being able to reach across and to is nothing like you, and yet, you know, has had life experiences and pains that connect to your own, because we share the condition of being human. And that's one of the things that I'm really grateful for, the fact that I went to Nobles, because I've been able to have these lifelong friendships and these relationships that have, from a very young age, taught me so much about myself, but also so much about others, to the point that like, it's impossible to see other people as like collectible baseball cards almost, because I know their hearts, I know their families, I know their stories, I know their pains, I know their joys. And similarly, I think like that's exactly what needs to happen. We need contact. We need community. We need to be together. We need to ask questions. And so in order to do that authentically again, and I feel like I can't say this enough, we really have to do that with ourselves first. There's a lot of myth making in our country. The entirety of the United States is one large myth, right? And so I think what's painful about this period of time is that we are seeing the myths come undone. We're seeing the lies where they lie. But I also think there's really a lot of opportunity to remake ourselves into something real, something that we've never been. And I see that as being so much closer than I think we give ourselves credit for. It just takes courage. And I really hope that each of us is able to tap into like our wells of courage.
Oh, beautiful. I love that, reclaiming our humanity. Mariel, I have to end with some shout outs because they're awesome. So my friend Elliot Pratt, you're incredible. My time on the Nobles board was way too short. Have you ever considered running for public office? If not, you should. I agree, Elliot. We have Tracy Booth, shut the front door. I'm so amazed of your journey. Thank you for sharing your energy and spaces, so many. Jana Herman, how do we get lucky enough to have you in our class? That's all.
Jana!
Greg Croak wants to know if Poppy is still throwing parties during COVID and can we zoom into them? We have,
we're vaccinated now.
Some as we go through. We've also got a couple, Jill Walsh, about how amazing you are, and a couple of shout outs from some of your teachers. Stacy Turner, so proud of you, Mari. Glad you're taking care of yourself and taking time to heal.
Love you.
You have time to change the world. Mark Sheeran, you are a rock star. So proud of you, and thanks for all you do. And I'll end, Tori Goyette, I love you. I'm so proud of you. And the last one I'll end with, which is a question I asked you a few weeks ago, which is, when are you writing a book? I need to have your incredible thinking near me at all times. And that was what I said a few weeks ago when I was privileged to have some of this prep. You are a beautiful soul, and I am just so honored to have been able to share some time with you and to be on the screen with you. And I do believe, I sincerely believe you're going to make a difference in the world that will have a deep and lasting impact for generations. And we're just so proud of you. Thank you for all the gifts you shared with us today.
Thank you for blessing me with, I mean, Nobles is just like right here. And it's just the gift that kind of keeps on giving in my life. I'm losing my voice. So I'm like,
well, right back at you.
I love y'all. And thank y'all for those of you who showed up. And asked questions and cheered me on. I feel really loved and held.
Good. Wonderful. I hope those of you joining tonight do jump in on lots of other events of the next few days. Just Mariel said, to connect with one another, to build those connections, to reclaim our humanity as people, as certainly as a community at Nobles. I'm so grateful for it. Thank you all. Have a wonderful night.
Love y'all. See you around.